But we do have one more group to resolve, and that is Group B. Sintolol versus Silvors.
It's a big match. Sintolol looking to make it back to a championship. If he makes it through there, it would be his second world championship in a row.
All right, we're going to get into that decider match right after this.
Against Silvors. Darroch, you see the deck list in front of you. What's the story of this matchup?
It's a bit of a weird one, as Silvors has, in some regards, a nice anti-aggro lineup, which, make no mistake, Sintolol's very simple. Every single deck is very aggressive, especially after the Token Druid has been banned away. There is, however, one big weak spot for Silvors, which has been the story for a lot of players here at the HCC playoffs in Death Rattle Hunter. It's just not good against any of the decks which Sintolol has, so if he is going to be taking this series, I would imagine hard target strategy.
So just as a general concept, what do you make of these more varied lineups? Of course, giving yourself more of a range of decks gives you more strengths, but it also gives you more weaknesses. Conquest, of course, more about weaknesses than strengths, would you say?
Yes, I think that's fair. You just want to make sure you have no deck that can be completely swept.
Right.
But every time I see this type of lineup or I'm asked this question, I always say I prefer the more targeted lineups that have a specific strategy in mind, but I'm consistently proven wrong. Every single time, players who just bring 4 good decks do so well. I know Ball Control is a big acolyte of that strategy.
Okay.
Where I remember the premier time he did that is when he came second at Copa America, only losing to Muzzy, who also had a kind of similar strategy, where they're just bringing good decks, and it just seems to work. Silvors here with a similar strategy. He doesn't have any of these especially targetable lineups or decks like Queststroke thrown in there. Just decent decks according to him, and it's done very well for him so far.
Fair enough. Well, if you're going to be consistently proven wrong and you're filling in for Raven, it feels like you're in the right place. The series is getting underway. Death Rattle Hunter, probably the most vulnerable deck here to this full aggro strategy from Sintolol, is where Silvors is going to lead out, and Sintolol starting out on that Odd Rogue with a handful of 1-drops and a nice juicy Vilespine Slayer for a big tempo swing later on. Seems like a decent start for Sintolol.
Yeah, it's not even that bad that he's missing some of the power 3-drops like Hench Clan or Vicious Fledgling, because those are the cards that are weak to the removal from Silvors, be it through Hunter's Mark with the Candle Shot or the Flanking Strike that you see there, which is a really nice way for Silvors to try and claw this game back, which has already got a little bit messy, but he's got a decent hand to be fighting back with.
Yep. And now the eternal debate. I want a one-word answer, Darroch. Kill this egg, yes or no?
No. You stick a 5/5 on the board, they're going to hit you with it anyway.
Darroch just
I'm role-playing Raven! I was paid to do this job. I've been asked to fill in for Raven, okay? He's tanking the 4 as well.
He just took the 4, yeah,
Oh.
took 5, yeah. So, like, honestly, Raven is probably the biggest advocate of popping eggs that I know. And
yes.
he was having a debate with Admirable backstage about the relative merits of popping an egg.
Yeah.
And he actually made a point that I do very much agree with, which is rare, which was if you can pop the egg and contest the 5/5 on board afterwards, that's usually when it's right. It's when you pop the egg and the 5/5 over contests what you have that it's a big problem. And that's kind of exactly what Sintolol set up there, right? The 5/1 wasn't going to do anything particularly relevant. It was just being contested by one of his Fireflies.
So if Silvors there had Play Dead and a Terrascale Stalker, or just some combination of 2 Death Rattle effects he could play on that turn,
Yeah.
obviously I can see for Sintolol a massive benefit for killing off that egg. I just kind of question though, because the main thing I'm circulating all of Sintolol's plays around are going Coin Fungalmancer is really what I'm looking at in every scenario. And if he had just pushed face there, I struggle to think of a situation where he would not have been able to go for Coin Fungalmancer on that turn and push a lot of damage through his face.
So
This also sets that up.
Yeah, but also you can look at this with the other argument, right? It's like, well, you've popped the first egg, but now a second egg's come down, you're just going to ignore it. So, like, this hasn't really worked out particularly well with the egg plan. But still a very hotly contested issue to this day, but Sintolol has made his choices, he will have to deal with them now. And Silvors is now having to react to the rather oppressive board state that's being built up against him.
Yeah, Sintolol clearly seeing the downside of his plays coming into effect here. The inability to go Coin Vilespine or activate either of these bad boys for the moment. But I guess he can quite happily delay, throw down the Giggling Inventor, and then hope to snipe off that bear on the following turn and push an awful lot of damage through to face.
Yeah. And this Giggling Inventor is pretty much the perfect card for the scenario that he's going to be dealing with, which is there is a lot of 5/5s in the future with double Terrascale Stalker being built up now. So if he can keep these irritating taunts in the way through that period, that will keep Sinto entitled to keep going face here, which is what he really wants to do.
So much so is Silvors afraid of attacking into these Annoyatrons that he's just going to try and blow a couple of them up with this Spider Bomb. A pretty nice roll there for Silvors, but even then, an Annoyatron is just a 2-drop if we think back to our good old days of GVG. It's not that valuable spending a whole Death Rattle to blow it up, even if it is incredibly annoying to break through.
So now the Valspines are coming into play. He does have a couple of high tempo turns back to back. For me, like this matchup as Odd Rogue, you don't really need to get super greedy with your Valspine, right? You just want to use it to reinforce tempo where you can and keep going. Sinto seems to agree with us this time. So that makes a nice choice.
Yeah, not really much of a decision there because it puts the most stats onto the board. Also swinging tempo back in your favor. A difficult choice there as to whether he traded in with the Giggling Inventor into the Spider Bomb before going for this play. He could have shipped everything else first, face to first of all. Oof, that was a bit of a mess, that sentence. But then he could have been less vulnerable to Death Rattle effects on this Spider, which could be pretty powerful here.
Yeah. Currently, I think crucially on board, the Spider Bomb doesn't do anything right now, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you would have to ask Silvors to have another Death Rattle activator for it, or, you know, Hunter's Mark, Flanking Strike, something like that, to be able to take the Annoyatron out of the way first. It just so happens that Silvors has all of those options, and is actually spoiled for choice this turn as to which of them he wants to use.
And he will be able to clean up pretty nicely here. Sintolol being punished for his play of not going for the... of not going more trading route rather than going very aggressive. And it does feel like Sintolol this game has been a little bit confused as to whether or not he wants to play around Death Rattle activators and whether or not he wants to go face consistently or whether he wants to play for board.
Yeah. Still has another pretty strong push here. The debate now, and it looks like Sintolol has solved that debate quite nicely, is whether you want to use second Valspine here to reinforce tempo again, like we talked about last time, but now suddenly you have threat of Catharena coming down on 8, right? And if Catharena comes down on 8, that can pull out the second huge taunt minion. And that seems like a situation where Valspine is then your only out in that position.
I like that point very much. We saw Sintolol wincing when the first bear came down and he couldn't deal with it with the Valspine. So if the second one were to come, he wants to make sure he's prepared. And now even with that King Crush, I don't believe there's any way that Silvors... Oh, wait, he can survive at 1?
Yep.
Which, for the moment,
1 is all you need.
Gets it done. 1 health and a dream for Silvors to try and pull this back.
Never mind.
Void Ripper is that 1 health, a fist pump from Sintolol, taking himself what was a favorable matchup going into it, and was such a pivotal win.
And Sintolol's gone full circle. He went from popping his opponent's eggs so that they couldn't get activated, to letting all the Death Rattle activators going off, to just popping the last egg for him and killing him in the process. Is playing the pure and noble aggro strategy up against Silvors, who has a very mixed bag. A couple of really strong anti-aggro decks and a couple of very weak ones. And he's failed at the first hurdle with one of those weak decks, which is the Death Rattle Hunter, and then immediately reverts back to one of his real power decks in the matchup, which is the Maui Top Druid.
And speaking of power decks, when you draw a hand such as this one, you are looking to be getting off to a pretty disgustingly powerful start. Why not draw a Twig as well, just to really boost your victory?
Hi, I'm Gamer Sensei's Rusty, and I'm going to show you how to win with Druid.
A lot of experienced players draw Wild Growth on 2 to give themselves a more resilient and consistent game plan.
Following it up with the Twig on turn 4.
Just like you!
As we are obviously alluding to, Silvors has just got what you want with Druid. This is why it's such a dominant deck in Hearthstone at the moment, because sometimes it can just get hands like this and it just destroys their opponent. The one weakness of this strategy of spending the first 2 or 3 turns ramping, I suppose, is very early, extremely powerful board plays, which Sintolol could have found if he'd got himself a Mana Worm a little bit earlier on, or even this hand with a couple of minions is starting to push forward a little bit of damage.
Yeah, little bit is the key part of that explanation, though. It's really not quite getting there. And now Ferocious Howl does bring some of that armor gain into play, meaning that Silvors can afford to just sit back a little bit longer and look for those bounce backs later. And this is where Arcane Tyrant can just really come into play, just turning what was an incredibly slow turn into a very, very fast one. And Sinto letting you know exactly which letter of the alphabet is most relevant to his position.
Yeah, it's not looking great for him, especially when his hand is entirely spells at this point. He's drawn pretty much every secret in his deck at this point, along with another Spellbender to bolster that out as well.
Yeah. There is, at least he used the right hand. There's no bigger L in existence than trying to do that L and using the wrong hand.
That's why I always win. You can't do a backwards W, Sol.
That's the most profound thing I've ever heard.
Well, you're welcome. I sometimes do it upside down, which says M, and I'm still to figure out what that one means.
Opens dictionary, turns to M, and spends the next 10 minutes looking for the funniest word to respond to that with.
How about Moyen, our current fall playoffs top fourer?
Yeah. So if you're worried why we're a bit distracted here, it's because this is, to put it mildly, an uphill climb from this position for Sintolol. But now, suddenly, this is the kind of board swing turn he really, really needed. And now if Silvors doesn't find a way to deal with this, which he has not, now Sintolol has a swing turn.
And Silvors here is playing real aggressive for ramp. He's used both Wild Growths and the Nourish purely for ramping rather than saving the Wild Growth there as he could have done for draw on 10 mana. And it does mean that if he does not find the necessary draws to restock his hand, obviously I'm talking about UI in particular, Nourish and Branching Paths could be decent as well, he's going to be in a rough spot.
I do like how he offset that, like he understands that, right? That's why he's gone with Blood Mage and Flute Blood Mage as a follow-up to this.
He has, however, left himself open to a counterspell from Sintolol to try and just counteract an ultimate infestation off the top. Oh no, wait, he hasn't.
Yeah. I will say, okay, the amount of things, like, okay, your opponent can play Counterspell. Most aggro mage lists now are only playing one Counterspell, which I believe is true of Sintolol, yes. Secondly, he has to clear that 3/4 that you put in front of him for 3 mana or less to be able to play Counterspell and protect his Cosmic Anomaly, which would be the first thing he's looking to do. And then you have to also not draw Moonfire off those 2 draws to be in the position where Counterspell bothers you. So I think it's very unlikely that the Counterspell interaction comes into play there. You see actually even Sintolol deciding not to play the Counterspell, basically going with a bait secret here to try and bluff the Counterspell first before his actual Counterspell comes out.
That's right. What this is trying to do is say to Silvors, even if you have UI, you are not allowed to play it because counterspelling it loses the game.
Yeah.
It's worth pointing out Sintolol played a Glyphed secret, which will make Silvors less likely to believe that it is a counterspell.
Sure.
But I think if he had a UI in hand and no Moonfire, he still would not go for it because that's a game-losing scenario. Sintolol still in a position where he can win board back on this turn if he was so inclined. With Kirintor either secret and fireballing out the minion, just trying against all odds to lock down this board before Silvors can restock his hand.
This is just such an interesting little dance right now. Sinto refusing to play Counterspell until a spell has been cast, but the Moonfire is what is stopping all of that business coming out to play. And Sinto now thinks he's about to be UI'd. He's about to get some good news in that it's only Branching Paths that's going to follow this up, at least in the short term.
Which is decent for Silvors to find some card draw, but it's not great. You want to be spending those Branching Paths on armor to pull yourself out of any kind of burn range, which he is still in until the UI was picked up.
But now, the Moonfire was used. The dance has resolved itself, and Sinto has actually come out with a little bit of an advantage because of it. And I'm not saying that little bit of an advantage is going to be enough, because Silvors had an enormous advantage to begin with in the matchup and then drew the absolute stone cold nuts on top of that through the first 3 or 4 turns. But it's given Sinto just a little crack in the window.
This is a very delicate dance. Having never seen the movie Dirty Dancing, I presume it goes something like this.
It's famous for its ultimate infestation baits, Dirty Dancing.
I love the bit where salty German Hearthstone player baits out that UI perfectly. As now, with the twig ready to be broken, and Malfurion off the top, the bane of every aggro mage, I think Sinto can pretty much throw this down. Ultimate Infestation ready to go for it as well. Silvors equalizes the game, as was kind of in the cards right from the start.
It sure was, and Sinto has been resigned to defeat in that one for quite some time.
And we've seen that from a lot of the players talking on social media, where many players bringing Death Rattle Hunter, who dropped out on the first day, were lamenting bringing it, saying, I believe Death Rattle Hunter sucks, was the hashtag being thrown around a bit. Whereas players like Boar Control, who brought Subject 9 Hunter, were saying they've never submitted a lineup that was better suited for a playoffs.
Right.
Perfectly illustrating what you were saying about how good the anti-aggro strategies here are at the Europe playoffs.
Yeah, I do wonder, you know, when you build a lineup and then, you know, other players bring the same as you, and you see, like, say someone brought the same lineup as you did and they qualify for championship and you went 0-3. How do you, like, a week later, obviously initially you're really salty, but like a week later, do you take solace in that you had the right reason going into the tournament? Do you feel like that means your Hearthstone is in the right place? At least you had the right lineup going in? I don't know. It's kind of weird to get a handle on.
I think so. It's not like the dream where you and a buddy both submit the same lineup and you both happen to win the tournament, like we saw with Viper and Bunny Hopper, where they both qualified for the World Championships with, I believe, 120 cards, same lineup. That's when you know you've truly smashed it.
Well, speaking of smashing it, there's one thing that's going to be smashed pretty hard this game, and it appears to be Silvor's face, because there is not a great deal of game coming back here.
I don't know. I don't hate the position Silvor's in. He's got Spider Bomb to come down here. Houndmaster Shore, even if it just ends up being a 4-mana 3/6, is fine. It's something to contest the board. If it does stick, however, then you're just rushing in with Saronite Chain Gangs and you're in a lovely spot.
So, hang on, this turn's weird. So wait, you have to go face with the Sorcerer's Apprentice, play a secret first, then trade with the 2/3, then play your Mana Worm. Is that the correct sequencing?
Would you rather have a Mana Worm destroyed than a Sorcerer's Apprentice, but also have less chance of destroying a 2/1? This is very complicated.
Excellent question.
What to do?
I think you saw, if you're watching Sinto's cam, his reaction at the start of this turn as he saw the Mana Worm get drawn as well. He's just going to max it out. Okay, fair enough.
He's trying to high roll here. Get the 2/1 to die off from the Death Rattle.
Sure. Yeah, and I think Sinto's reaction, again, pretty much sums up our commentary. That was a very difficult turn, and he ended up with a result that he's reasonably okay with.
Yeah, I think with his play playing the Mana Worm first, he indicates he would rather have the Sorcerer's Apprentice survive.
Sure.
But in this line of play where he plays the Mana Worm first, it's a 2/3 Mana Worm rather than a 1/3 Mana Worm, whereas if he'd played it second. So, again, a really complicated little turn, which he's come out pretty decently off of, I'd say.
Yep. Again, not the easiest turn. These aggro mage early game turns are often where the game is won and lost. You put a lot of thought into the late game turns when you're trying to set up 2- and 3-turn lethal just to make sure you don't miss anything. But they're plays that should be very apparent when you put a little bit of thought into. These mana allocation plays earlier in the game are for me what are just a lot more complex and a lot more decisive. And yes, Sintolol has ended up playing the 4-drop on 4, which kind of makes that whole spiel seem a little bit silly, but there were other valid options there for sure.
Oh, for certain. I think a lot of players would have gone for the Frostbolt, because it has many benefits. You get to push 5 damage to face, I think it was on that turn. The fact that you have a Luneth in hand here means going for the aggressive options is somewhat more valid. But maybe actually if you have a Luneth, you want to make sure that you're not playing it on an empty board for your half of the playfield, so you're taking a bunch of damage on the turn you play it. So I can see what Sintolol's going for, setting up these stronger board plays right now for a cleaner Luneth on turn 6.
Again, this entire game so far has just been one giant probability puzzle. We need Lorinda casting this one in particular, because now there's the decision of Cinderstorm Frostbolt to deal with this 3/8. Which order are you choosing to do that in? Because there you go, 1 damage has now been wasted with the Frostbolt having to overkill by 1. But how likely is that to happen versus the idea that you then maybe sometimes don't Frostbolt and go Primordial Glyph instead. There's a one outcome where you can just ping off the 3-8 instead of using the Frost. Like, there's all kinds of bizarre nonsense.
And in the worst case scenario where you Frostbolt first, then go Cinderstorm, and it survives, you are in a miserable position. So I think from Sintolol, he misses 1 damage for the certainty, well, near certainty, that these minions get to survive.
That is lethal on basically any castable spell. Yep.
That'll do it. Was it almost Snap Freeze's time to shine here at the Europe playoffs?
Actually, with the ping already, didn't even need it. Like, it was just any other spell in hand already would have done it with the Primordial Glyph. But yeah, Sintolol picks up 2 very quick wins with 2 very favoured decks against 1 more spot remaining at our full championships, and it's going to be the Zoo that he has to fall back on now, which to me throughout, I don't have hard data on this in terms of win rate, but just through kind of empirical evidence, it seemed to be the lowest performing of the aggro lineups. It seems to be, you know, without that straight up burst damage that like Odd Rogue has access to, for example, once it's forced off board by some of these slower decks, it's had a hard time getting it back again. But like I said, I don't actually know the win rates off the top of my head of these, how these decks have performed. But still, how do you feel about this matchup for the Death Rattle Hunter?
Well, it's one that's a bit of a miserable matchup to climb back from because, again, you have to lock down the board so quickly. But one thing that will be somewhat more in Silvors' favor is, as he was, you know, starting to lock down the board at the end of the last game, against a Zoo, once you lock down the board, you're in a pretty good spot. Yes. Above 9 health is, oh sorry, with Leroy Jenkins 10 health is usually the break point. If you can stay above that and lock down board, you should be in a pretty good spot.
See Sinto very displeased to lose the roll on that Spider Bomb, taking out his Flame Imp instead of his Void Walker. He doesn't care about fancy keywords like taunt, he just wants maximum power in play. I just couldn't decide whether I wanted to say with on board or in play and just kept trying to do both in different orders.
I like it, it's very efficient casting, you just say 2 things at once. We can just describe both board states. Describe it as like the Wanter. It's like a Warlock Hunter. I'm not going to do it the other way.
Very careful with
that. Not going to do it the other way. Yeah. A little bit less. Yeah, PG.
Now, Saronite Chain Gang running into Saronite Chain Gang, you never want to be the guy playing the second Chain Gang in this scenario because the punishes are all on the player with attacker's initiative. But right now, Sintolol doesn't really have any of them. Voodoo Doctor kind of helps make some nice breakpoints here, but it's not the Fungal Mancer that he really wants to be seen.
Yep, Fungal, or well, Fungal Mancer or Fungal Enchanter, any of the mushroomy boys would do a great job of making these trades a lot more efficient for Sinto.
Now, speaking of when you get forced off board, you don't have a way to deal massive burst damage as Zoo. Sinto now has a way where he can theoretically set up a counterpoint to that.
Point taken. Now with Leroy and Soulfire, that's 12 burst from hand.
Yes, and this Soul Infusion as well. It looks like he's choosing not to use it here on this Voodoo Doctor, and he's going to leave that Leroy on the far left of his hand. What I was alluding to, he can now set up even more damage off. Oh, debating the Soulfire now, and he's using it to spam the Leroy as well.
Yeah, that is not the way that Sinto wanted this to go. He wanted that burst damage to close this out. Using the Soulfire to lock down his board, though, I think will usually end up in him getting a little bit more attack over the course of the game. But if he can't find something good to stick this Soul Fusion onto, he could be in a rough spot, but that is the draw you are looking for here.
So now again, the debate on the usage of this Soul Infusion.
I think you throw it down here. If you're going into a Deathstalker Rexar turn, which that's the thing you are most afraid of, you want to have a 4/4 rather than a 2/2.
And with Deathstalker Rexar in mind, which minions are you buffing and how are you trading, if at all, into this 3/11?
So there's no way that you can value trade a minion and survive the 2 damage from Deathstalker Rexar. So I suppose you just put it in the middle of the 2 chain gangs, because then if they don't have Deathstalker Rexar, you're in a really good spot. Or this accomplishes a similar thing, I suppose, and does actually leave you with more minions on board because you trade off the weaker ones. So
yeah, at least you with a
more of a hedging around
against the Rexar like this. And now Silvors is looking like he has no response to this. Sintolol was responding that entire game as if he was going to lose. You believe just his face, everything was going against him, but that wasn't the...
Well known they are.
Yes.
As we see all the players here. Renmen on the Global Games team for Russia is most known well for. Sintolol being really the star player. We've got a great mix of upcomers and very established memers, dreamers in Sintolol.